In 2011, my wife and my family decided to renovate the Round Barn and create this event venue. The origin of the barn started with James Gilmore, James A. Gilmore. In 1835, he settled on this property. He raised his family here for 70-some years. His son, James K. Gilmore, and then his son, actually Francis Gilmore, built the barn in 1898-99 due to the history of finances and all that, trying to figure out the survey stuff.
So the idea of a round barn came about because a farmer could save on wood or stone with a round building that needs less material than traditional barns. Experts also believe that farmers could save steps and time in feeding their animals in a round barn, and round barns stood a better chance against strong winds. Some round barns are not truly circular. The octagonal barn is one example, 8-sided. We'll explore also 16-sided barns. Less than 1% of barns built in America are round barns. The barn was used primarily for dairy production, and the building of them stopped around 1920.
It is known as one of the largest and earliest polynomial barns or round barns in Missouri. It is the only one that has limestone walls all the way up. The barn is at approximately 8,000 square feet. It has 3 levels. The walls on the lower level are 24 inches thick. This has 3 stories. First level's full limestone. They built it back into a hillside, and that's where they sort of kept the livestock. Second level is actually built so they could, on a dirt ramp and enter, and they could drive around it with horses and wagons and feed the corn crib that goes from the second to the first floor. And that's how they fed, because you couldn't back a horse and wagon, so they drove around it, and that's sort of the design of the barn. After that, the third level is for the hay, and with that, it's about 1,500 square foot, and they could lift with they could rake out the back of the wagons, throw it out the back, and extend it to the top floor.
This all started with Thomas Jefferson. He was obsessed with octagonal shapes. He seemed fascinated with the geometric structure and the features of an octagon. Among Jefferson's architectural notes held by the Massachusetts Historical Society is a geometric construction for obtaining 3 sides of an octagon given the length of the chord subtending them. He seemed to be a perfectionist, and he would later rewrite his own edition of the Bible to cut out parts he didn't agree with. One of the things Jefferson liked about octagonal rooms is that it allowed more light into the room. His tier room at Monticello features the octagonal shape. All this started with Jefferson when he traveled to France in 1878. He toured the countryside and saw examples of octagon-shaped structures. He was fascinated with the structures and the ancient structures as well that he found touring in Italy. He traveled anonymously and would explore the vast reaches of the countryside. He would climb atop the tallest structure in the city and get a look at all the buildings. Jefferson loved the French culture so much, he was known as a Frenchophile, whatever. He loved the French. He would also shortly after this become friends with Angelica Church, who had a 9-sided barn in New York. She was the sister-in-law of Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton was the former secretary of the U.S. Treasury that was famously killed in a duel with the vice president at the time, Aaron Burr. John Church, Angelica's husband, actually provided the pistols to both Aaron and Alexander. So his pistols what killed Alexander Hamilton. Also to be noted, her nephew Philip was killed in a duel with the same set of pistols. In any event, Angelica had a passion as well for the multi-sided structures, and this would further embolden Jefferson to continue his pursuits of the octagon. In fact, Jefferson's obsession with the round barn seems like it may have rubbed off on George Washington. Jefferson had traveled to France in 1787 and was inspired by the octagonal structures, and Washington built a round barn around 1872. Not to be outdone by Jefferson, Washington decided, you know what, I'm going to double his 8 sides. I'll see your 8 sides and I'm going to make it 16. That's right. Washington made a 16-sided round barn. Hey, look, at this point, it's pretty much a circle. Let's not kid ourselves. Next up on the Octagon crazy train, and the person that influenced round barns in the 1800s was Orson Fowler, a phrenologist. He believed that the perfect shape of the house was a circle, which was hard to build, but octagonal was doable. So he encouraged people to build these homes. Fowler was a vegetarian, and he promoted a vegetarian diet in his book, Physiology, Animal and Mental. And he was a vice president of the American Vegetarian Society in 1952. He defended animal rights and opposed the slaughter of animals. He created a popular magazine called the American Phrenological Journal. Wow, that's a tongue twister. He also supported vegetarianism. He was a very strong abolitionist, fighting against the injustice of slavery, but was also an anti-Semite. It seemed many octagonal-shaped, obsessed people were confused. But the Octagon cult craziness did not stop with Fowler. Octagon City is a ghost town in Allen County, Kansas, United States. It was a failed intentional community that was founded in 1856, about 6 miles south of Humboldt, Kansas, near the Neosho River. It was created by the Vegetarian Kansas Immigration Company, headed by prominent vegetarian Henry S. Clubb and the entrepreneurs Charles D. Wolfe and John McLaurin. The original intent was to build a vegetarian commune on the south side of the Neosho River for vegetarians only. This is an exclusive club. But the investor interest in a non-vegetarian moral community was much higher, and so the decision was made to build Octagon City on the north side of Neosho River to make the entire project sustainable. Right, the Octagon on the south side, no good. Octagon north side, oh yes. Members of Octagon City were under the oath to educate their children and uphold a moral lifestyle. The city's design was influenced by no other than Orson Fowler. Thank you, Orson. This project strangely reminds me of Biodome. Anyways, during May 1856, 100 participating settlers arrived at the development site, expecting a blossoming town with a grist mill and sawmill, but finding only 1 log cabin, 1 plow, and a dozen of tents sheltering families. We were sold a bill of goods that was not as described. The site was very remote, and the nearest source of goods was in Fort Scott, Kansas, about 50 miles away. So the residents were forced to adapt and improvise. Mosquitoes, a flu-like epidemic ascribed to malnutrition, exhaustion, or malaria, the threat of border ruffians and strong thunderstorms were a continuous problem. By early July, the springs feeding the community had dried up. Some residents chose to live at an Osage Indian settlement a few miles away, which had a flowing spring, but they were forced to flee back to Octagon City upon learning that the tribe was about ready to return from its annual buffalo hunt. Probably wouldn't have been a good idea to play Goldilocks with the Osage Indians. This scalp is too small. This scalp is just right. The summer months saw a continuous exodus of settlers and the population quickly thinned. By August, crop theft by the Osage Indians became a major problem. Very few of those remaining past summer had any intention of making permanent homes in Kansas. They waited only for opportunities to get away. By 1857, only 4 of the original residents were left, and the survivors reported more illness as the weather became warmer again. The area remained remote until 1873 with the arrival of the railroad. The town of Chanute, Kansas sprang up 4 miles south of the former commune. Nothing survives of the settlement except the tributary Vegetarian Creek. A marker was erected near the site in 1986, but due to repeated vandalism, it was removed in 2001 and donated to the St. Paul Neosho County Museum. The moral of the story, folks, octagons are trouble. If we've learned anything from Chuck Norris, stay out of the octagon.
Chuck Norris, Karen Carlson, Lee Van Cleef, the Octagon.
You don't torment me anymore, Sakura.
Corner centers. And like I said, it's a 100-year-old barn that stood the Battle of Time. And it'll probably be one of those castle type relics around this area because of how strong it is built. Like I said, in 1920 the Gilmore sold it, and then it was changed hands over time. My grandparents, Mike and Wilma McGilvery, bought it in 1982 from the Gold family, and from then on it's going to be my grandpa's legacy to run this place, to keep this farm passed down generations to generations. And like I said, it's just, we've now tried to renovate so a lot of people in this area of Ash Grove can enjoy the barn just as much as we enjoyed it when it was a hay barn and running through it. Now people are able to get married in it. People are able to rent it for events. I'm a school teacher there at the Ash Grove, and we do a lot of banquets here just because we want to make it mean something to the kids. And so we just want this place to be just one of those known sites of Ash Grove, which everybody, I feel, if you grew up here, says we're at the Round Barn, we're almost there. And one thing that I think is always funny is, I've heard the joke told many times, but people walk in since I was little to now, they always say, somebody told me they died in this barn because they couldn't figure out which corner to pee in.